Victoria Sterling stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her Manhattan penthouse, watching the city pulse with life 30 floors below. At 42, she had built an empire that most people could only dream of. Her tech company, Sterling Innovations, was worth billions, and her personal fortune had recently crossed the $50 million mark. Yet despite all her success, there was an emptiness inside her that money couldn't fill. The penthouse was a testament to her achievements. Original paintings by famous artists hung on the walls, and every piece of furniture had been carefully selected by the most expensive interior designers in the city. But it felt cold, like a beautiful museum where no one actually lived. Victoria often found herself eating dinner alone at the massive dining table that could seat 12 people, wondering what it would be like to share a simple meal with someone who truly cared about her. Her assistant, Margaret, knocked softly on the door and entered with her usual stack of papers. "Mrs. Sterling, the quarterly reports are ready for your review and you have a board meeting at 3. Victoria nodded without turning from the window. "Margaret, do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had made different choices in life?" Margaret paused, surprised by the personal question. Her boss rarely shared her thoughts about anything that wasn't business-related. "Sometimes, ma'am. But I think we all end up where we're supposed to be. Do we?" Victoria finally turned around, her green eyes reflecting a sadness that her wealth couldn't mask. "What if the person you were meant to be with is out there somewhere, but you've become so focused on building your empire that you've forgotten how to find real connection?" The question hung in the air between them. Margaret had worked for Victoria for 8 years and had watched her boss transform from a driven entrepreneur into one of the most powerful women in technology. But she had also seen how lonely Victoria had become, how she threw herself into work to avoid dealing with the emptiness in her personal life. That evening, Victoria attended a charity gala at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. She moved through the crowd with practiced ease, shaking hands and making small talk with other wealthy donors. Her designer dress cost more than most people made in a year, and her jewelry sparkled under the museum's lights. Everyone wanted to talk to her, to be seen with her, but she could see the calculation in their eyes. They saw dollar signs, not a person. During the auction portion of the evening, Victoria found herself bidding on painting after painting, not because she particularly wanted them, but because it gave her something to do. When a portrait of a young couple holding hands came up for bidding, something inside her stirred. The way the man looked at the woman in the painting reminded her of a feeling she had almost forgotten. The feeling of being truly seen and loved for who you are, not what you have. She won the painting for $2 million, far more than its estimated value. As she signed the papers for the purchase, an older woman approached her. "That's quite a beautiful piece you just acquired," the woman said with a warm smile. "Yes, it is," Victoria replied, though she wasn't entirely sure why she had wanted it so desperately. "I'm Dr. Elizabeth Harper. I study human behavior and relationships." The woman's eyes were kind but perceptive. "I couldn't help but notice how you looked at that painting. Are you searching for something?" Victoria felt exposed, as if this stranger could see right through her carefully constructed facade. "Aren't we all searching for something?" Dr. Harper smiled. "Some people spend their whole lives looking for love in all the wrong places. They think it's about finding someone who matches their lifestyle or social status. But real love often appears in the most unexpected forms." After the gala, Victoria couldn't stop thinking about Dr. Harper's words. She stood in her penthouse looking at the new painting that now hung in her bedroom. The couple in the portrait looked so happy, so complete. She wondered if she would ever experience that kind of connection. Over the next few days, Victoria found herself becoming increasingly restless. Work no longer provided the distraction it once had. During board meetings, she would catch herself staring out the window, thinking about the conversation with Dr. Harper. Her mind kept returning to the idea that love might be hiding in plain sight, in unexpected forms. One morning, as she walked through the lobby of her office building, she noticed the cleaning staff beginning their daily routines. There was something comforting about their quiet efficiency, the way they went about their work without seeking attention or recognition. She had passed these same people hundreds of times over the years, but had never really seen them as individuals, with their own stories and dreams. That night, Victoria made a decision that would change everything. She called Dr. Harper and arranged to meet for coffee. When they sat across from each other in a small cafe in Greenwich Village, Victoria felt nervous in a way she hadn't experienced since her early days as an entrepreneur. "I can't stop thinking about what you said at the gala," Victoria began. "About love appearing in unexpected forms." Dr. Harper stirred her coffee thoughtfully. "Tell me about your past relationships." Victoria recounted a series of failed romances with other wealthy executives, celebrities, and socialites. Each relationship had followed the same pattern: initial attraction based on status and lifestyle compatibility, followed by the gradual realization that they didn't actually connect on any meaningful level. "It sounds like you've been dating your own reflection," Dr. Harper observed gently. "Sometimes the person we're meant to be with is someone who sees the world completely differently than we do. Someone who can teach us things about life that we never knew we needed to learn." As Victoria walked home that evening, she felt something shifting inside her. For the first time in years, she felt hopeful about the possibility of finding real love. She didn't know where to start looking, but she knew that whatever she had been doing wasn't working. Maybe it was time to try a completely different approach. Dr. Harper's words echoed in Victoria's mind for weeks. She found herself paying attention to people she had never noticed before: the barista who made her morning coffee, the doorman who always greeted her with genuine warmth, the elderly woman who fed pigeons in the park during her lunch breaks. Each person seemed to have a richness of experience that her wealthy circle lacked, but Victoria had no idea how to connect with people outside her social sphere. She had spent so many years building walls around herself that she didn't know how to tear them down. Every interaction felt forced and artificial, like she was playing a role in a movie she didn't understand. One evening, feeling particularly frustrated with her failed attempts at meaningful connection, Victoria called her younger sister Rebecca, who lived in Portland with her husband and 2 children. Rebecca had chosen a completely different path in life, working as an elementary school teacher and living modestly but happily. "Becca, I need to ask you something," Victoria said, pacing around her penthouse. "How do you meet people? Real people, I mean, not the kind who are interested in what you can do for them." Rebecca laughed, but not unkindly. "Vic, you're overthinking this. Real connections happen naturally when you're just being yourself. When was the last time you did something just because you enjoyed it, not because it served some business purpose?" Victoria realized she couldn't remember. Every social event, every dinner, every conversation in recent years had been calculated to advance her career or maintain her social status. She had forgotten what it felt like to do something purely for the joy of it. "Maybe you need to start over," Rebecca suggested. "Remember when we were kids and you wanted to be a teacher? You used to say you wanted to help people learn and grow. What happened to that person?" After hanging up, Victoria sat in her empty penthouse and tried to remember who she had been before the money and success had changed everything. She recalled being passionate about education, about making a difference in people's lives. Somewhere along the way, she had lost sight of those dreams in pursuit of bigger and bigger financial goals. The next morning, Victoria did something she hadn't done in 15 years. She took the subway to work instead of her private car. As she sat among the commuters, she watched people reading books, listening to music, having quiet conversations. There was an authenticity to these interactions that was missing from her world of boardrooms and charity galas. At her office building, Victoria noticed the cleaning staff again as she entered the lobby. An idea began to form in her mind. What if she could find a way to connect with people through service, through actually helping rather than just writing checks? She spent the day researching volunteer opportunities and community programs. By evening, she had signed up for 3 different activities: reading to children at the local library, serving meals at a homeless shelter, and helping with adult literacy classes at a community center. Her first volunteer shift was at the children's library on Saturday morning. Victoria felt nervous as she entered the brightly colored room filled with small chairs and picture books. She had invested millions in educational technology companies, but she couldn't remember the last time she had actually read to a child. The librarian, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a warm smile, introduced herself as Mrs. Chen. "Thank you so much for volunteering. The children love story time and we always need more readers." As Victoria sat in the small chair with a group of 5-year-olds gathered around her, something magical happened. The children didn't care about her designer clothes or her wealth. They were completely absorbed in the story she was reading, their eyes wide with wonder at the adventures of a brave little mouse. One little girl with pigtails tugged on Victoria's sleeve. "Can you read it again, please?" For the first time in months, Victoria smiled without thinking about it. Of course, sweetheart. After story time, Victoria helped the children with a craft project. Their innocent questions and boundless enthusiasm reminded her of what pure joy felt like. She had forgotten that happiness didn't have to be complicated or expensive. When her shift ended, Mrs. Chen walked her to the door. "You're a natural with the children. I hope you'll come back next week." "I wouldn't miss it," Victoria replied. And she meant it. Over the following weeks, Victoria threw herself into volunteering with the same intensity she had once reserved for building her business empire. At the homeless shelter, she served meals and listened to people's stories. She learned about struggles and hardships that her wealth had shielded her from, but she also discovered incredible resilience and dignity in people who had very little material wealth. The adult literacy program was perhaps the most rewarding of all. Victoria worked with immigrants and adults who had missed educational opportunities earlier in life. She helped them learn to read and write, but they taught her about courage, determination, and the power of small daily victories. One of her students was Maria, a woman in her 40s who had come to America from El Salvador and was learning to read English so she could help her children with their homework. Maria cleaned office buildings at night and took care of her elderly mother during the day, but she still found time to attend literacy classes 3 evenings a week. "Why is education so important to you?" Victoria asked one evening as they worked through a reading exercise. Maria looked up from her book with determination in her eyes. "My children will have opportunities I never had, but only if I can help them. Learning to read is my gift to their future." Victoria was struck by the profound love in Maria's words. Here was a woman with very little money, who was willing to sacrifice her limited free time to better herself for the sake of her family. It put Victoria's own pursuits into perspective. As weeks turned into months, Victoria found herself looking forward to her volunteer work more than her business meetings. The people she met through service were teaching her about values she had forgotten existed: compassion, community, and the satisfaction that comes from helping others without expecting anything in return. But even as Victoria was discovering a new sense of purpose, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was still missing something important. Dr. Harper's words about love appearing in unexpected forms continued to haunt her thoughts. She was learning to connect with people in meaningful ways, but she hadn't found the deep, romantic connection she was searching for. Little did she know that the answer to her longing was closer than she could have ever imagined. Victoria's transformation didn't go unnoticed by those around her. Margaret, her longtime assistant, watched with amazement as her boss became more relaxed and genuinely happy. The sharp edges that had defined Victoria's personality for years began to soften, replaced by a warmth that drew people to her naturally. But Victoria wanted to do more than just volunteer a few hours each week. She wanted to make a real difference, the kind that required significant resources and commitment. During a late-night planning session in her penthouse, an ambitious idea began to take shape. What if she could create a foundation that would connect successful professionals with people who needed help in their communities? Not just writing checks, but actual hands-on involvement. She envisioned a program that would bring together people from different worlds, creating unexpected friendships and breaking down social barriers. Victoria threw herself into developing this concept with the same passion she had once reserved for her business ventures. She hired a team of social workers and community organizers to help design programs that would be meaningful and sustainable. The foundation would be called Bridge Builders, reflecting its mission to connect people across social and economic divides. The launch event for Bridge Builders was held at the community center where Victoria had been teaching adult literacy classes. Instead of the usual fancy hotel ballroom, she wanted to celebrate in a space that represented the foundation's values. The room was filled with an unusual mix of people: wealthy donors, community volunteers, students from the literacy program, families from the homeless shelter, and neighborhood residents. As Victoria stood at the podium to address the crowd, she felt more nervous than she had during any business presentation. These people weren't interested in profit margins or market shares. They cared about real impact, about whether her foundation would actually make a difference in their lives. 6 months ago, I thought I knew what success looked like, Victoria began, her voice carrying across the crowded room. I measured everything by numbers: dollars earned, companies acquired, properties owned. But I've learned that the most important things in life can't be counted on a balance sheet. She looked out at the faces in the audience. Maria from her literacy class, Mrs. Chen from the library, families she had served at the homeless shelter. You've taught me that real wealth comes from connection, from service, from being part of something bigger than ourselves. The crowd erupted in applause, but Victoria noticed one person who wasn't clapping. A man standing near the back of the room was watching her intently, his expression thoughtful rather than celebratory. He was wearing simple work clothes, khaki pants and a navy blue shirt with a name tag. Even from a distance, there was something compelling about his quiet presence. After her speech, Victoria worked her way through the crowd, accepting congratulations and discussing program details with potential volunteers, but she found herself looking for the man in the work clothes. Curious about why her words hadn't seemed to move him the way they had affected others, she finally spotted him helping to clean up after the reception, stacking chairs with efficient, practiced movements. As she approached, she could see his name tag clearly. David, Facility Services. Excuse me? Victoria said, feeling oddly nervous. I noticed you during my speech. Did you have questions about the foundation? David looked up from the chairs he was stacking, and Victoria was struck by his eyes. Deep brown and incredibly kind, but also cautious. It sounds like a good program, he said simply. I hope it works out. There was something in his tone that suggested skepticism, though he was too polite to express it directly. Victoria found herself wanting to understand his perspective. You don't sound entirely convinced. David paused in his work, considering his words carefully. I've seen a lot of well-meaning programs come and go. Rich people get excited about helping for a while, then they move on to the next trendy cause. The people who need help are still here after the cameras and the fancy events are gone. His words stung because Victoria recognized the truth in them. How many charity galas had she attended where people wrote large checks and then never thought about the cause again? What would convince you that this is different? Time, David said without hesitation, and showing up when it's not glamorous anymore. When it's just the hard daily work of actually helping people. Victoria studied his face, intrigued by his honesty. Most people were eager to tell her what they thought she wanted to hear. But David spoke with quiet conviction about things that clearly mattered deeply to him. You work in this building? She asked, genuinely curious about his story. I work in several buildings in this area, David replied. Cleaning offices, maintaining facilities. I've been doing it for about 10 years now. Before Victoria could ask more questions, David excused himself to continue cleaning up. She watched him work, noticing how he interacted with other people, always respectful, offering help without being asked, moving through the room with quiet dignity. Over the following weeks, as Bridge Builders began implementing its programs, Victoria found herself thinking often about David and his challenge. She was determined to prove that her commitment was genuine, that she wouldn't abandon the foundation when the initial excitement wore off. Victoria began spending more time at the community centers and program sites, working directly with participants rather than just overseeing from a distance. She helped serve meals, assisted with job training workshops, and continued her volunteer work with the literacy program. During these visits, she occasionally saw David in various buildings around the neighborhood. He always acknowledged her with a polite nod, but their interactions remained brief and professional. Victoria found herself wondering about his life outside of work, about what had shaped his perspective on wealth and service. One evening, while leaving a late literacy class, Victoria discovered that her car wouldn't start. The parking lot was nearly empty, and her usual driver wouldn't be able to reach her for at least an hour. As she stood beside her disabled vehicle wondering what to do, David appeared from the building, apparently finishing his cleaning shift. Car trouble? He asked, approaching with the same helpful demeanor she had observed at the foundation launch. The engine won't turn over, Victoria replied, feeling somewhat helpless. She was used to having people handle such problems for her. David asked to look under the hood, and after a few minutes of examination, he identified the issue. Your battery connections are corroded. I have some tools in my truck that might help. As David worked to clean the battery terminals, Victoria found herself in the unusual position of being genuinely grateful for a stranger's kindness. When was the last time someone had helped her without wanting something in return? Why are you being so nice to someone you barely know? She asked as David tested the connections. He looked up from the engine, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Maybe because you're someone I barely know. No expectations, no complications. Just one person helping another. The car started on the first try, and Victoria felt a rush of gratitude that went beyond simple appreciation for mechanical assistance. In David's straightforward kindness, she glimpsed something she had been searching for without even realizing it. The encounter with David lingered in Victoria's mind for days afterward. There had been something refreshing about his straightforward kindness, the way he had helped her without any awareness of her wealth or status. She found herself hoping to run into him again, though she wasn't entirely sure why. Victoria's curiosity about David grew stronger as she continued her work with bridge builders. She began asking subtle questions about the building maintenance staff at the various locations where the foundation operated. Through casual conversations, she learned that David was well respected among his co-workers and the building tenants. People described him as reliable, honest, and always willing to help. One afternoon, while working with Maria on her reading exercises, Victoria's student mentioned something that caught her attention. "The nice man who cleans our apartment building helped my son with his bicycle yesterday," Maria said during a break between lessons. "He's always so kind to the children." "What building do you live in?" Victoria asked, though she tried to keep her tone casual. When Maria described the location, Victoria realized it was just a few blocks from the community center. She wondered if it might be one of the buildings where David worked, but she didn't want to ask directly and reveal her interest. That evening, Victoria made an unusual decision. Instead of having her driver pick her up after the literacy class, she decided to walk through the neighborhood. She told herself she wanted to better understand the community where the foundation was working, but she knew she was hoping to encounter David again. As she walked past a modest apartment building, she saw a familiar figure in the courtyard. David was helping an elderly man repair a broken outdoor light fixture. The older man was speaking in Spanish, and David was responding in what sounded like fluent Spanish, occasionally laughing at something his companion said. Victoria stopped walking and watched from a distance. There was something beautiful about the scene. Two people working together to solve a simple problem, finding joy in their conversation despite the language barrier that might have existed. David's fluency in Spanish suggested layers to his life that Victoria hadn't expected. The next day, Victoria made a decision that surprised even her. She scheduled a meeting with the facility management company that serviced several of the buildings where bridge builders operated. She told herself it was about ensuring the foundation's programs had adequate space and resources. But she knew her real motivation was learning more about David. The meeting was with Robert Martinez, the district supervisor for the cleaning company. Victoria had expected a routine business discussion, but Robert turned out to be passionate about his work and protective of his employees. "We're not just a cleaning service," Robert explained as they toured one of the facilities. "Many of our workers have been with the company for years. They become part of the communities they serve. People trust them with their keys, their safety, their children. That level of trust must be earned," Victoria observed. "Absolutely. Take David Rodriguez, for example. He's been with us for 10 years, and I've never had a single complaint about his work. In fact, I get compliments about him regularly. Tenants request him specifically for their buildings." Victoria felt her heart skip at hearing David's full name. She tried to keep her expression neutral as Robert continued. "David could have moved up to management years ago, but he prefers the hands-on work. Says he likes being directly helpful to people rather than pushing papers around. He's got a degree in social work, you know. Could be doing something that pays more, but he chooses this work because it allows him to be present in the community." This revelation stunned Victoria. David had a degree in social work, the very field she was now trying to impact through her foundation. Yet he chose to work as a janitor. She wondered what had led him to make that choice. "He sounds like an exceptional employee," Victoria managed to say. "He is, and he volunteers on his own time too. Helps kids with homework in the apartment buildings, translates for families who need assistance with paperwork, that sort of thing. Some of our workers clock out and disappear until the next shift. But David sees his job as taking care of people, not just buildings." As Victoria left the meeting, her mind was spinning. David wasn't just a kind janitor who had helped her with her car. He was an educated man who had deliberately chosen a life of service over personal advancement. The more she learned about him, the more intrigued she became. That weekend, Victoria did something she hadn't done in years. She went to the neighborhood laundromat. It wasn't because she needed to wash clothes. Her penthouse had its own laundry facilities. She went because she had heard David mention to Robert that he usually spent Saturday afternoons at the laundromat on Maple Street. The laundromat was nothing like the sterile, efficient world Victoria was accustomed to. It was crowded and noisy, filled with families washing clothes while children played between the machines. The air smelled like detergent and the warmth of dryers, and there was a sense of community that Victoria had never experienced. She spotted David sitting in a plastic chair, reading a book while waiting for his laundry cycle to finish. He looked completely at ease in the chaotic environment, occasionally looking up to smile at a child who ran past or to help an elderly woman move her wet clothes to a dryer. Victoria approached nervously, carrying a small bag of clothes she had brought as a prop. "David, I thought that was you." He looked up in surprise, clearly not expecting to see her in this setting. "Victoria, right? From the foundation. What brings you to this neighborhood on a weekend?" She felt foolish suddenly, realizing she hadn't prepared a good explanation for her presence. "I was visiting some program participants and realized I had laundry to do," she said, hoping he wouldn't notice that her bag contained only a few designer items that clearly didn't require urgent washing. David nodded politely and returned to his book. Victoria loaded her clothes into a machine, fumbling with the unfamiliar coin-operated system. After a few moments, David noticed her struggle and came over to help. "First time using one of these?" he asked with gentle amusement. "Is it that obvious?" Victoria laughed, feeling embarrassed but also oddly charmed by the situation. As they waited for their respective laundry cycles, they began to talk. David asked thoughtful questions about the Foundation's programs, and Victoria found herself opening up about her hopes and concerns in ways she rarely did with anyone. "What made you want to start Bridge Builders?" David asked. Victoria considered the question carefully. "I realized I had spent so many years building wealth but not building relationships. I wanted to find a way to connect with people authentically, to be useful in a real way. That's not easy to do when you're starting from a position of privilege," David observed without judgment. "People are naturally suspicious when someone wealthy suddenly wants to help. They wonder what the catch is. What would convince you there's no catch?" Victoria asked, echoing their earlier conversation. David smiled. "I told you before, time and consistency. Showing up when it's not convenient or glamorous. Listening more than talking. And being willing to learn from the people you're trying to help." As Victoria folded her freshly cleaned clothes, she realized she was enjoying this simple, ordinary activity more than any of the elaborate social events she usually attended. There was something peaceful about the rhythm of the task, something grounding about being in this community space. When they both finished their laundry, David offered to help Victoria carry her bag to her car. As they walked through the neighborhood, Victoria saw it through different eyes, not as a place where poor people lived, but as a community where people looked out for each other, where children played safely in the streets because adults cared enough to watch over them. Standing beside her expensive car, Victoria felt the stark contrast between her world and David's more acutely than ever. But she also felt drawn to the authenticity and purpose she saw in his life. She wanted to understand what it would be like to live with such clear priorities, such direct connection to community. Over the following months, Victoria found herself drawn into the community where David lived and worked with increasing frequency. What had started as professional curiosity about the Foundation's impact areas had evolved into something deeper, a genuine desire to understand a way of life that was completely different from her own. She began volunteering for more hands-on activities, often working in the same buildings where David provided maintenance services. Their encounters became more frequent and natural, though Victoria was careful not to appear too eager or intrusive. She valued their conversations and didn't want to make David uncomfortable with unwanted attention. During one of these interactions, while Victoria was helping organize donated school supplies at a community center, David approached her with an observation that caught her off guard. "You've been around the neighborhood a lot lately," he said, not accusingly but with genuine curiosity. "Most Foundation executives visit once or twice for photo opportunities, then disappear back to their boardrooms." Victoria felt exposed, as if David could see through her carefully constructed reasons for being there. "I find the work here more meaningful than sitting in meetings all day," she replied truthfully. That's not common in your world, is it? Choosing meaning over efficiency? His question struck at something Victoria had been wrestling with for months. She had built her entire career on maximizing efficiency and profit. But her recent experiences had shown her the value of slowing down, of investing time in relationships and community connections that might not have measurable returns. No, it's not common, she admitted. But maybe that's part of the problem with my world. As autumn turned to winter, Victoria noticed that David often worked late shifts, cleaning office buildings after most people had gone home. One snowy evening, she encountered him leaving the Sterling Innovations building, her own company's headquarters, as she returned to pick up some forgotten documents. "You clean my building?" she asked, surprised to see him in the familiar lobby of her corporate headquarters. David nodded, seemingly unfazed by the coincidence. "Tuesday and Friday evenings, usually. It's a big contract for our company." Victoria realized that for months, possibly years, David had been working in her building while she was upstairs making business decisions that generated more money in an hour than he likely earned in a month. The disparity felt uncomfortable and somehow wrong. "Do you ever think about the people who work in the buildings you clean?" she asked as they walked together toward the parking garage. "All the time," David replied. "You can learn a lot about people from their workspaces. Some people keep family photos on their desks, personal touches that show they remember there's a world outside the office. Others have spaces that look like hotel rooms. No personality, no connection to anything beyond work." "What does my office look like?" Victoria asked, curious about his perspective. David paused, seeming to consider whether he should be honest. "Until recently, it looked like the second type. Very impressive, very expensive, but cold. Like someone who had forgotten that work is supposed to support life, not replace it. Until recently? The last few months I've noticed changes. You have pictures now. Children from the literacy program, a group photo from the foundation launch. Your space looks like someone actually lives in it, not just visits it to make money." Victoria was touched that David had noticed these small changes, that her gradual transformation was visible, even to someone who only saw her workspace after hours. She wondered what else he had observed about her life that she might not even be aware of herself. As winter deepened, Victoria made a decision that would have seemed impossible to her a year earlier. She decided to spend Christmas Day volunteering at the community center, serving dinner to families who might not otherwise have a traditional holiday meal. The day was chaotic and wonderful, filled with the laughter of children and the warmth of people coming together to celebrate despite their circumstances. Victoria found herself working alongside David, who had volunteered for the same event. Together they served plates of turkey and mashed potatoes, helped organize children's activities, and cleaned up after the meal. "This is how I used to imagine Christmas when I was a child," Victoria told David as they washed dishes side by side in the community center's kitchen. "Not the expensive presents or fancy dinners, but the feeling of being part of something bigger than yourself." "What happened to those feelings?" David asked gently. Victoria considered the question as she dried a stack of plates. "I got distracted by the wrong kind of success. I started measuring everything by numbers instead of by how it made people feel." After the Christmas dinner cleanup was finished, David offered to walk Victoria to her car. The evening was cold but clear, with stars visible despite the city lights. As they walked through the quiet neighborhood streets, Victoria felt a contentment she couldn't remember experiencing before. "David, can I ask you something personal?" she said as they approached her car. He nodded encouragingly. "Why did you choose to work as a janitor when you have a degree in social work? You could be running programs like the ones I'm funding." David was quiet for a moment, his breath visible in the cold air. "I tried the traditional social work path for a while after college. Caseloads, paperwork, bureaucracy. I felt like I was spending more time documenting problems than actually solving them." He paused by a streetlight, his expression thoughtful. "Cleaning buildings doesn't sound glamorous, but it puts me directly in people's communities. I see the same families every day, watch their kids grow up, notice when someone needs help. I can respond immediately instead of filing reports and waiting for approval from supervisors. Don't you want more recognition for the good work you do?" Victoria asked. "Recognition from whom?" David replied. "The people I help know what I do. Their appreciation is all the recognition I need." His answer humbled Victoria in a way she hadn't expected. She had spent her entire adult life seeking recognition from peers, competitors, and business publications. The idea of finding fulfillment in quiet, unrecognized service was foreign to her, but deeply appealing. As they reached her car, Victoria felt reluctant to end the conversation. She had never met anyone who challenged her assumptions about success and purpose the way David did. Every interaction with him left her questioning values she had never thought to examine. "Would you like to have coffee sometime?" she asked impulsively. "Not for foundation business, just to talk?" David studied her face carefully as if trying to understand her motivation. "Are you sure that's a good idea? We come from very different worlds." "Maybe that's exactly why it's a good idea," Victoria replied. "I've learned more about what matters in life from our conversations than from years of business school and corporate strategy sessions." David smiled, and Victoria felt her heart flutter in a way she hadn't experienced since she was a teenager. "Okay," he said simply. "I'd like that." As Victoria drove home to her empty penthouse that night, she felt something she hadn't experienced in decades. The nervous excitement of looking forward to spending time with someone simply because she enjoyed their company. For the first time in her adult life, she was interested in someone not because of their social status or business connections, but because of their character and the way they saw the world. The next few weeks passed in a blur of anticipation and self-doubt. Victoria found herself thinking constantly about David, his quiet wisdom, his genuine kindness, the way he had chosen purpose over prestige. She began to see her own life through his eyes, and didn't always like what she saw. Their coffee date was planned for a Saturday afternoon at a small cafe in David's neighborhood. Victoria spent an embarrassing amount of time choosing what to wear, finally settling on simple jeans and a sweater, clothes that would help her blend in rather than stand out. She wanted their conversation to be about who they were as people, not about the vast economic differences between them. When she arrived at the cafe, David was already there, reading a worn paperback novel. He looked up and smiled when he saw her, and Victoria felt that flutter of nervous excitement again. She had negotiated million-dollar deals without breaking a sweat, but the prospect of a casual conversation with David made her palms damp with anxiety. "I wasn't sure you'd actually show up," David said as she sat across from him at a small table by the window. "Why wouldn't I?" Victoria asked, genuinely puzzled. "Rich people make a lot of promises they don't keep," he replied without bitterness. "Good intentions don't always survive contact with reality." Victoria realized that David was testing her not maliciously, but out of self-protection. He had probably seen wealthy do-gooders come and go from his community many times before. She would have to prove her sincerity through actions, not words. Their conversation flowed easily from topic to topic: books they had read, places they wanted to travel, childhood memories that had shaped their values. Victoria discovered that David had grown up in the same neighborhood where he now worked. The son of immigrants who had sacrificed everything to give their children opportunities for education and advancement. "Your parents must be proud that you went to college," Victoria observed. The weeks following their coffee date marked the beginning of the most intense period of self-examination Victoria had ever experienced. Her growing feelings for David forced her to confront uncomfortable truths about the person she had become and the life she had built around herself. She began spending more time in David's neighborhood, not just for foundation work, but because she felt more authentic there than anywhere else. The community had started to accept her presence, and people greeted her by name on the street. For someone who had spent years being known only by her net worth and business achievements, this simple recognition felt revolutionary. One evening, while helping with an after-school tutoring program, Victoria overheard a conversation that stopped her cold. Two mothers were discussing her involvement in the community, unaware that she was within earshot. "She seems nice enough," one woman said, "but you know how it is with rich people. They play charity for a while, then they get bored and move on to something else." "My sister works for cleaning company," the other mother replied. "She says the rich lady has been asking a lot of questions about David Rodriguez. Maybe she's not really here for the community at all." Victoria felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and shame. The mothers weren't entirely wrong. Her initial interest in David's neighborhood had been motivated by her curiosity about him. But their words forced her to examine whether her feelings were genuine, or simply the result of romanticizing a lifestyle that seemed more authentic than her own. That night, Victoria called Dr. Harper, the woman she had met at the charity gala months earlier. They arranged to meet for dinner, and Victoria found herself pouring out her confusion and uncertainty. "I think I'm falling in love with someone," Victoria confessed over their meal, "but I'm not sure if my feelings are real or if I'm just infatuated with the idea of a different kind of life." Dr. Harper listened thoughtfully as Victoria described her relationship with David, her volunteer work, and her growing dissatisfaction with her previous lifestyle. "What scares you most about your feelings for this man?" Dr. Harper asked. "That I might be using him as an escape from my own life instead of genuinely caring about who he is," Victoria replied honestly. "And that even if my feelings are real, the differences between us might be too great to overcome." "What would you be willing to sacrifice for love?" Dr. Harper pressed. The question haunted Victoria for days. What would she be willing to give up? Her penthouse? Her social status? The respect of her business peers? As she considered each possibility, she realized that many of the things she thought defined her felt hollow compared to the connections she had built through her volunteer work. Victoria decided to be completely honest with David about her feelings and her concerns. She asked him to meet her at the community garden where they had both volunteered to plant vegetables for local families. The setting felt appropriate, a place where they had worked together to create something beneficial for others. "David, I need to tell you something," Victoria began as they sat on a bench surrounded by the small green plants they had helped nurture. "I think I'm falling in love with you, but I'm not sure you should trust my feelings." David looked surprised but not uncomfortable. "Why shouldn't I trust them?" Victoria took a deep breath and forced herself to be completely vulnerable. "Because I've spent so many years living in an artificial world that I'm not sure I know what real love feels like anymore. What if I'm just attracted to the idea of your life rather than actually caring about you as a person? What do you think the difference would be?" David asked gently. "If I just wanted your lifestyle, I'd be trying to pull you into my world or completely abandon mine to play at being part of yours," Victoria replied, the answer becoming clear as she spoke. "But if I really love you, I'd want to find a way to build something new together, something that honors both of our values." David was quiet for a long moment, watching children play in the nearby playground while their parents tended to the garden plots. "Victoria, can I ask you something?" She nodded, prepared for whatever difficult question he might pose. "The building where I work on Tuesday and Friday nights, Sterling Innovations, that's your company, isn't it?" Victoria's heart sank. She had been dreading this moment, knowing that eventually David would make the connection between her volunteer work and her business identity. "Yes," she said simply. "I figured it out a few weeks ago," David continued. "Your picture is in the lobby, and I started putting pieces together. Victoria Sterling, the tech billionaire, is the same person who's been reading to children and serving meals at the community center." "Are you angry that I didn't tell you?" Victoria asked, fearing his answer. "No," David replied, surprising her. "But I am curious about why you didn't." Victoria struggled to find the right words. "Because I was afraid that if you knew how much money I had, you'd see me differently. Everyone does. They either want something from me or they assume I can't relate to their problems. And you think I'd be like that? I hoped you wouldn't be, but I wasn't sure. What we have felt so pure, so honest. I didn't want money to contaminate it." David stood up from the bench and began walking slowly along the garden paths. Victoria followed, unsure whether his silence was a good sign or a bad one. "Victoria, I've known who you were almost since the day we met," David said finally. "Your picture isn't just in your building lobby. It's been in newspapers and business magazines. The wealthy philanthropist who started Bridge Builders." Victoria stopped walking, stunned by this revelation. "You've known all along?" "I've known about your money, yes. But I've also gotten to know you. The person who shows up consistently to help with literacy classes, who stays late to clean up after community events, who asks thoughtful questions and actually listens to the answers. And knowing about my wealth doesn't change how you see me." David smiled, and Victoria felt relief wash over her. "It complicates things," he admitted. "But it doesn't change the fact that I've fallen in love with you too." The words hung in the air between them, precious and fragile. Victoria felt tears of relief and joy spring to her eyes. "What do we do now?" she asked. "We figure out how to build a life together that makes sense for both of us," David replied, taking her hand. "It won't be easy," People in your world will think you're crazy for choosing someone like me, and people in my world will wonder if you're slumming for entertainment. I don't care what other people think, Victoria said, and she realized she meant it completely. I know you don't right now, but there will be challenges we can't even imagine yet. Are you prepared for that? Victoria looked around at the community garden, at the families working together to grow food for their neighbors, at the children playing while their parents created something beautiful and useful. This was what she wanted, not the isolation of wealth, but the messiness and richness of genuine community. I've spent $50 million searching for something that was right here all along, she said, thinking of all the failed relationships, all the empty social events, all the business achievements that had left her feeling hollow. What was here? David asked softly. You, Victoria replied simply. Love that isn't based on what I can provide, but on who I am when I'm not trying to impress anyone. As they walked home together through David's neighborhood, their neighborhood, Victoria realized she felt a completeness she had never experienced before. The janitor she had passed countless times in her own building had turned out to be the love of her life, hidden in plain sight all along. She had spent a fortune searching for connection, only to discover that the richest relationship of her life would cost her nothing but the courage to be authentic. As David squeezed her hand and pointed out the evening stars beginning to appear above the city, Victoria knew she had finally found what she had been looking for her entire life.